Yes, I can hear you, although I'm not exactly sure how I don't know who's feeding the slides. I don't have the slides. There's supposed to be
I
somebody.
I think Dylan might have them. I don't have them, Alison.
I can run them, Professor Heckman.
Yeah, no, I mean, okay, fine. It was a little unclear. I never heard from Octavian anyway, so, all right.
Welcome to our conference. And I'm sorry, we slightly got the hour wrong, but it's so wonderful for you, for us to have you. We're honoured to have you. Thank you for coming and joining us. Yeah, I'll probably just let you to speak about, I think you're going to talk about the value of mothering and mentoring.
Yes, this is joint with Allison, who's on the screen with me as well. Although I think we're a little bit crowded here. Okay, very good. I don't know how to advance these at all, though. Oh, here we are. It works. How do I get it back? Oops, hold on a second. This is very clumsy indeed. Why is it this clumsy? I mean, I can't advance the slides.
Yes. So right now I'm advancing them. I'm not sure how to give them to you.
This is crazy. I thought I was going to get control. All right, anyway. So
you should be able to advance them. Why don't you try?
Well, I did try. Didn't work. So, okay, let me just start. Let me start with the beginning, okay? Can I have the first slide, please?
I believe you have control now. Why don't you try moving your arrow?
I don't have control. Now I have, it's jumping all over the place. Okay, very good. Sorry for the confusion here. I thought we were a little better organized. I'm certainly sorry that I'm not there and Allison's not there, because I think the work of your group is very important and I'm happy to contribute to it to the extent I can in this kind of handicapped way, must say. But I am very interested. But I want to present a little bit of background about our thinking and why we're economists and working in the zone that is the intersection between economics and a lot of other issues, social issues, including child development, and the measurement of skills and a number of other related questions, intergenerational mobility and the like. But I think what's happened in economics anyway, a lot of economists, not all by any means, have applied to the family a very literal notion about economics and the way we actually measure people. This is, of course, not in, there's an ardent feminism that casts male-female issues in a very narrow mold. And the only way that they value what women do and what women receive is by the status of their labor market rewards. So, for example, Claudia Golden, Marianne Bertrand, and many other feminists focus on equity measured narrowly as a matter of choice of occupation and wages. And it becomes a matter of head counting. 50% of everything should be female. Everything should be female, except, of course, birth and raising children and so forth. But I think we know, and economists have known for 80 years since the construction of the national accounts. Kuznets and others commented on this, Margaret Reed and Becker and Pierre-André Chiapperi. This narrow approach ignores household production, the quality of children, and the non-market benefits of marriage and household activity and the joy of having children. So let me speak about the evidence of what we know. It's amazing that there's so much money spent on interventions that are promoting children, disadvantaged children. I worked a lot on those, both in the US and in Europe and recently in China and in Jamaica. And those studies try to address the question of what happens if we provide a kind of surrogate mothering to disadvantaged children, or we supplement the kind of mothering and parenting that children are getting. And when we look at those studies, we find very strong effects of those programs. And I'll just describe them very briefly. But it provides what I would view as a lower bound of what really is missing in this literature, which is the value of a mother and the value of household output more generally. It's simply ignored. It's ignored in most studies. And so we worry a lot about disadvantaged families, as well we might, but we also ignore the fact of what middle class and and even mothers of all classes are providing, and the value they provide not only to their children and to their spouses and to their immediate vicinity, but also to the next generation, and in some sense, even their own personal preference. So what we're going to talk about is using the estimates from a literature, very well-established literature that we helped establish on the value of these parenting programs and viewing that as a lower bound on what mothers actually do. So we're going to use an indirect argument. And so what we're going to argue is simply very well known. It's namely that gaps in family backgrounds are substantial. They have substantial effects on child outcomes. The interventions we show, we can supplement and promote parenting. Now, this is a topic that's taboo in the US, and I suspect it's also taboo in the UK. But it's important for understanding the role of the family and the role of the mother, the role of the whole environment in shaping children. And I think the current feminist thought understates the environment. So here we put some quotes that are from individual women. Now, I won't read them to you. You can read them yourself. But they do talk about the fact that children are a joy and also a chore. But nonetheless, they provide a kind of utility, a kind of value that the woman herself feels, and they gets completely devalued into discussions about this. And so I think this is a huge neglected topic in the literature. So let me give you some evidence about this. Most of it's in terms of purely economic criterion, although we can look at the aspects of child development. But remember, these are programs that are designed to promote and sponsor parenting. If we were to ask, what's the value of the parent, other than just giving value to the birth, giving birth to the child and feeding the child, that we believe that we get much larger estimates. So anything we say here is a lower bound. So one thing we consider in the United States is that the question of gaps between blacks and whites, males and females, and so forth. And one finding that's emerged from many studies in the literature, people don't like to hear these studies, but once we have good measures of cognitive and non-cognitive skills, we have measures of work experience, we have measures of various aspects of the child's environment, and the kind of work environment in which individuals find themselves, that the market gaps themselves more or less disappear. These gaps are real. But the important part here is that when we look at these gaps that appear between the children of the haves and the have-nots, the more advantaged and the less advantaged, that we need to understand that these abilities are not fixed traits. This idea is, I mean, it's almost, to me, it's, I'm so familiar with this literature that I feel like screaming when I hear people go on and quoting Charles Murray or other people saying, yes, ability is genetically acquired and that these traits are fixed. They're not fixed. And what we've learned is that we can change things like IQ, all kinds of social and emotional traits, and we can improve them for the better. We can at least foster them, and parenting plays a crucial role in doing that. And so skilled, oh boy, this is really lousy. Can I get back that graph? Can I get the graph back, please? Somebody's controlling the slide. I'm not controlling the slides. It's jumping all over the place.
I think it's just delayed because I'm not touching them.
Okay, here. We'll see what it jumps to next. Okay. This will be like a interesting IQ test itself. Can I respond to a slide that appears? But anyway, so this is the kind of graph that you see everywhere. And I mean, you can see this in Colombia, the country of Colombia. You can see it in China. You can see it in the US, and you can see it in the UK. And what we see is that if you look at measures of success, which are these both cognitive tests and social and emotional tests, we see gaps that emerge at very early years in the livelihood of the child. But by the time, we can also see that the gaps that are there when people are entering college, the gaps that we often talk about in terms of college readiness, in terms of disadvantage, those gaps largely appear to be there at age 5, certainly opening up even at age 3. And before age 3, we can't honestly accurately measure these. So the question then becomes, and this is US data. So if you look at this data, you can see that this becomes very, very problematic because in the US, there's a huge gap in school quality between children of the more advantaged mothers and the disadvantaged mothers. And this plays a big role. Huh. Man, this total instability. I don't know. It's sad. All right. Well, I guess we'll just go through here. Anyway, so the fact of the matter is environments have worsened for parents, for children. And then what's happened is the family environment has changed somewhat. Skills are not fixed in stone, which I just said. The engagement of the family is far more important. This is a finding. I mean, so many people point to the schools as being the major source of the problem. But even since 1960s, when Coleman wrote his classic analysis of inequality in American schools, he pointed then to the fact that the family played a far more important role than school quality measures that were used in his study. And this has been found repeatedly. But nonetheless, public policy focuses on schools, political organizations focus on schools, politicians understand schools, and yet it's not the school, it's the family. The family plays a central role. And in the United States, we see a worsening of the family situation in the sense that there are more children growing up in never married households. And this isn't just cohabitation in the Nordic style. This is true, varied partner cohabitation. Some of the partners here will have as many as 11 different partners in the household over the course of the year. So we get enormous changes that are among these people. And we see growth in this pattern. So one thing we've learned is that if we look at children from different backgrounds, and here I'm looking at blacks and whites, that's been the focus of blacks and Hispanics. If you were to compare the AFQT scores, a measure of ability of for males and females, the black scores versus the white scores, a large bar at 1 means that blacks are well overrepresented in the distribution of the first decile of the distribution. And if you look at the top decile of the distribution, they're greatly underrepresented. And this is true for males and females. And that's closely related to what we see as emerging patterns about family structure. Now, it's not that it's just a black or white phenomenon. When we look more closely, and I don't have time to go through it now, we look more closely, we see very strong differences in the kind of background that is, oh boy, this is crazy. This is just crazy. This is crazy that we're doing this. I really not very happy with this. I don't understand why we're doing this. Where's Octavian? He's supposed to be helping us with this. Okay, what's he doing? Well, anyway, we're just sorting all over the place. So let me, okay, let me just, instead of using these crazy slides, let me just summarize briefly. If you look at the distributions by race, by family structure, and by various measures of disadvantage, what you see is that the children in these studies that are actually from more disadvantaged environments are getting much less emotional support, much less parenting, measured by many different ways. It's not that these mothers aren't well-meaning. It's that many of them are struggling. Some of them very poor, some of them working 2 or 3 jobs, some of them also having serious emotional difficulties themselves. But the point is that this kind of developmental sequence is very limited. So what we've done is we looked at a series of programs around the world that support parenting. And the parenting that kind of programs that we support is something very limited compared to what we can think of as some of the more classic early childhood programs. And those programs are things like ABC and Perry and Head Start. Those receive a lot of attention. And despite a lot of rhetoric that's come out recently saying that there's no lasting effects of these programs and these programs fade out. In fact, these programs do not fade out. They do have lasting effects. And we look at some of the Perry preschool children at age 50, we find IQs are boosted in a permanent fashion. We find that their employment is greater, their executive functioning is greater, and so forth and so on. But these are expensive programs. And what we've done is tried something much more modest. And this has been tried in Ireland in the Preparing for Life program. It's been tried in China in a program called China Reach Up. The Jamaica program, the Jamaican Reach Up program that Sally Grantham McGregor pioneered with her crew in Kingston, is the prototype for much of this work. And what's amazing is this provides a visit once a week, once every 2 weeks, actually, in the original Jamaican program, a fortnight visit of about an hour every 2 weeks with the children, with the parents of the children, and giving them advice about how to parent and guide their children. There's no long intensive study, no keeping of children in daycare centers, anything of the sort. But what happens is when we look at the consequences of those programs years later, we see that the program, the children are much better off. So for example, we're analyzing the Jamaican data right now. The program was done in the 1980s. These kids are now in the 30s. We see extensive control of a very low cost program, a program that's at the level of 5% of the cost of these larger, more elaborate programs that are frequently advertised and even commercialized in the child development literature. What we see is that the key ingredient of getting the parent involved, teaching the parent how to interact with the child, and the program is aimed at the parent, not the child. The parent then goes to the child and stays with the child for the remainder of their life. Those programs have enormous impact in terms of test scores when the children are young, measures of cognitive skill, measures of things like obesity, executive functioning, and so forth. But for example, the Jamaican children at age 35 now, so many years after the program was started, are much more successful in terms of emotional control, in terms of earnings, in terms of education, and a number of dimensions of attainment. And so what do we learn from all this? What we learn from this is that there is that the key ingredient that's missing in these programs is parenting. Understanding is parenting. The parenting itself, not the quality of the center, not whether or not there's a computer at the center, not whether there's a nurse, not whether the people have degrees. No, they don't have degrees. The visitors in these programs actually are of the same level of the people they're serving. They get trained by people who are more educated, but they're of the same level. And we've seen this in Gansu. We've seen it in Tibet. We went out into an area just west of Lhasa. So we see these programs operating in a way engaging the parent. And when the parents are turned on this way, we see enormous benefits. So the reason why I mention all this is not directly relevant to your program, your purposes. But we can see rates of return that are very high, 10, 15% per annum from very low key investments. And it's nothing to do with the credentials. It's nothing to do with the school building. It has nothing to do with all of the things that are mentioned in UN and World Bank reports and the expert reports. It has to do with turning the parents on. And it's the value of parenting. So this is a minimum boundary of what a middle-class mother does on a daily basis. And so when we look at these data, we can only be assured that we know that there is much more that a mother does, and that we don't measure it. And that right now we need to really put this evidence into the record, and to really not judge women and women's success only by the wages that they earn. That may be a measure of success, and I'm certainly not saying that women shouldn't be paid equally or treated equally, not at all. But I think that preferences and choices and the activities that women do should be valued much more in the public debate. So since my slides failed me, I think I'll just have to stop with that. Happy to take questions, and I can send the slides out. You can get a copy. I really regret that we had some incompetence here at this end.
I'm also happy to say a little bit more about
Yes,
what's
please.
happening in Ireland. So we, as Professor Heckman said, we've been studying the Preparing for Life program, which is a home visiting program in Ireland. It's outside of Dublin, and it's worked with begins in pregnancy, and what's unique about it is it meets with the family only about once a month, and the organization, how they would characterize the program is they say, that the mother needs to be held so they can hold the child, and then also the home visitor needs to be held so they can do the same for the parent. So it's this idea of parallel process. So when we think about, Professor Heckman, just presented, there's a lot of compelling evidence that working with parents can reduce inequalities. You have to think about how can you do that? How can you do that at scale? So Preparing for Life, they've just studied the effects at age 14 and find really strong effects, even actually increasing over time. So if we think of working with a family beginning, or with a mother beginning in pregnancy all the way through till formal school entry at age 5, it's really compelling when you're comparing the group that received those extra supports versus those that didn't. Then those gaps that Professor Heckman showed, are closing earlier. And we see improvements in child's cognitive skills, socio-emotional skills, school readiness, even longer term, into adolescence, for self-regulation and executive functioning. Things that we know from our research are really, meaningful over in somebody's entire life. So in Ireland, they're quite popular now. They're up to more than 10 sites in the country, and we're adapting that program to Hispanic families here in Chicago, where we're looking for partners to sustain the study. So together with the evidence that Professor Heckman raised and what's going on in Europe, it's just reinforcing the idea that parenting is really a powerful driver of all of these outcomes, and investing early is the right time to change the trajectory. So that's just a little bit more about what we're doing here and what's
But I would add a footnote that what you described is all accurate, and I completely endorse it. But on top of that, we should recognize this is the least of it. By what I'm saying is that if you look at the full value of what a parent does, that the parent does this and more. These programs are energizing parenting. And I'm not saying that parenting can't be improved. It can be. And it is. But it is improved by these programs. But I think when we look at the full value of the mother and the full value, including her choices, her values, where she wants to go, where she wants to be, the kind of person she wants to be, I think we need to move a lot away from the kind of ecofeminism that's dominated the literature and even got a Nobel Prize recently, but I think is sincerely misguided in stating how we think of human welfare and the value of mothers and mothering in society.
Wow, thank you.